Welcome, everybody, to the show. After a week's absence, joining us is our regular co-host and fellow traveler, Dan Noodles Man, the
Finally,
Michio Kaku of wargaming.
finally, we have an author here. This is Jack London's great grandson, the guy who wrote what's that? But White Fang, and what else did he write?
Call of the Wild.
Call it a bloody wild. Hey,
Welcome, Sam, to the show. We're here to talk about, I guess we'll talk about a wide variety of stuff, but let me first ask about Firefight Tactical, which is a game that you've got on P500 with GMT right now. So what's that all about?
Yeah, you're contractually obligated to ask about that.
That's true.
Okay.
Firefight Tactical is a tactical squad level World War II game that is a stab at what I've been calling a dice-driven war game. There are cards in it, of course, but it's primarily dice-driven. By that, what I mean is you have your units in the field, and you want to order them around, but you cannot do whatever you want to do with them. You have to draft dice from a common pool to do so, and if the dice are not there, you cannot perform that action. And so it actually, in that way, is modeling like command confusion, chaos in the battlefield, all this stuff, because that is as much as I love and own far too many tactical games, that is definitely a thing that bothers me. Is I don't want to have god level control in the battlefield.
Sam, sorry to cut you off. All the dice. It makes me think of what's that game?
Yahtzee?
Frontal assault. There, up front. For some reason, it makes me think of up front.
Mm-hmm.
But
up front's a major inspiration for the game. So
there are cards in up front.
You see, Artie. That's why I'm here. You see that? Because I've got the artistic vision.
Oh.
The artistic vision. But anyway, Sam. All the dice I see on these 5 cards on the GMT page.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is there a system to those dice rolls, or is it just random?
So, let me give you a little bit more information there. So at the start of the game turn, so the scenarios are played over a series of game turns. The game turns are comprised of a bunch of smaller impulse turns. And so at the beginning of a game turn, you roll the giant pool of dice, and you remove all the 6s. The reason for that is because the number of dice are the number of impulses that'll be in the game turn. But because you remove the 6s, you don't know precisely how many impulses you're going to have in that game turn. And then it's going back and forth. Now, the dice that you're drafting, the actions you're taking with them depend on the number on the die, but also the color of the die that you're assigning. And so a big part of the game is this hate draft that's happening with you and your opponent. Because especially once you know the game quite well, you're going to be looking going, okay, I know that he needs yellow dice. And also for what I'm going to do, he's going to be trying to counter. And when he's countering, maybe he's going to be trying to fire on me from a flank or something. He's going to be needing 5s for that. So I need to try to make sure that I'm trying to disrupt those dice that are going to enable him to do that as I'm doing my moves.
Okay, right? So it's nothing is willy-nilly here.
No. I mean, when we first playing the game.
No, in fact, no willies were harmed in the making of this game.
But the David, I'm gonna talk your ear off about my favorite tactical systems in a second, but I want to finish this point. The thing is that if you actually look at the counters, I have them set up so the Axis units, their dice sequence, as far as the dice that activate their orders, are inverted from the allied ones. And so that way, even when you're not intending to, when you're pulling dice, you're pulling options from your opponent. So it's supposed to be, if I'm doing aggressive actions, that's actually limiting their mobility. It's getting harder for them to get it together to actually mobilize. On the flip side, if I'm mobilizing a whole lot, it's harder for them to consolidate firepower in a meaningful way to try to stop me. And so you're kind of hate drafting each other by accident before you even know the game very well. But once you do know it, that becomes a much bigger part of it. I told David I would come back to that. I'm actually an ASL guy, believe it or not. But I also love Band of Brothers. I'm a big fan of that system. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, I love the now defunct Heroes of Normandy system.
Oh, that's defunct?
Well, I mean, they went out of business, so
Oh,
it's
well,
the system exists, but
that'll do it.
but yeah, I that's for arcadey fun. I love that. Yeah, I have way too many tactical games, so I could
Sam,
talk. Anyway.
Sam, you said I'm ADD, so I'm going to fly off here. Okay, so you're a huge ASL fan.
I mean, I don't get to play it as much as I would like. Yes, I
Okay.
mean, there's a stack right here that
That's
from the
great.
bottom up is Beyond Valor, Rising Sun, Halloween,
Jesus,
Yanks, King and Country, Doom Battalions. That's right
I
on
get
my
it. I
left.
get it. I get it. And you said you like.
Dan doesn't know what any of those products
Yes,
actually
I know
are.
what they are because I
But-
check it on Mobile 9. They cost a fortune.
I do.
Yeah.
So, Sam,
Hmm.
and so you go to Band of Brothers. So Band of Brothers is it's not a broken system. It's a great system. So why would you want the complexity of ASL where you can, well, I'm not going to say where you can get the same effect.
That's not
But
the
I
same
mean,
thing.
yeah, no, I get it. I'm stupid as I'm talking.
Band of Brothers, to me, the way I always imagined in my head was Band of Brothers is more like tactical gaming chess. There's still randomness in it, but it's so distilled into the tactics that it's almost an exercise. Whereas ASL tells me more of a narrative. And then I have all these game systems because they each give me something different. You know, the ones that don't eventually get voted off the island, but
You know, it's
Send them to the hole.
He says the narrative. That's what I like to play games for. Narrative.
I think that's actually an absolutely astute point. I feel like ASL provides tremendous narrative.
That's incredible.
I think that's an overlooked asset of ASL that people tend not to recognize because they think that, without having touched it, sometimes folks think that that's the kind of thing you can only get in, the Hunters or something that's extremely procedural like that. ASL's not that procedural, really. Be easier to learn if it was.
yeah.
So,
No, I play all these for something, and then the creating Firefight Tactical was because I'd mentioned this before we went on the air, but I've been designing games for about 20 years, and I had never had the inspiration to work on a war game, which was very frustrating because I love war games, but nothing ever spoke to me. And then all of a sudden, I wanted to work on a tactical, but there's a million tacticals. And so what would I possibly develop that could make something that somebody might want that already is, you've got such a saturated market. And so I was trying to do something that was kind of a combo of your kind of traditional tactical with some Euro elements and stuff to make it a little bit less run for the hills, for the people that aren't the initiated. Because, I mean, I got a very large game group. I'm very lucky about that. But I can get them to play some strategic level war games. They like not instantaneously repulsed by that, but as soon as they see a hex grid, they're at it. And so I wanted to create something like that, but at the same time, you get into it. You can have this. You can have your quick play with people that are not quite as into that kind of thing, but then there's all this crunch that you can bring in that hopefully evokes my favorite things from the genre that I'm kind of picking inspiration. As I mentioned up front, is an amazing game, and so that was a major inspiration. So is ASL, and the last one was Combat Commander.
Combat Commander, okay.
Inspiration as well, because my only issue with Combat Commander ultimately was I couldn't stand it when I drew a hand. And I was like, I can't do anything with this. Like, I just kind of got it.
War, man. Fog of War.
Yeah, and so in Firefight Tactical, you have that, but not at the beginning. Rarely, because what you have is the big dice pool, and then it's like, all right, my top 3 things I got to do, I can do because there's just a ton of dice. But then as we get through that game turn, now I can't, and I'm like, well, that's okay because my priority, I can make that happen. Might not work out, but I can make it happen. But then it kind of goes, oh, well, you know what? Actually, I kind of need these guys over here. Oh, crap, I can't get them over there. And so I wanted to have that kind of, I guess, gradient of control. But yeah,
Sam,
go ahead.
do you know that game, Fields of Fire, Ben Hull?
Mhm.
Any influence from that?
No, none, because
Okay.
I've never played it and I've never read it.
I feel the same way about Combat Commander, incidentally. It sounds like you and I may have a little bit of overlap in our interests here. We have a question from the chat about how solo friendly this is, and I'll let you explain that. But GMT seems to feel it's extremely solo friendly. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, the reason is because they just get, oh, we want a bot. And I was like, oh, I don't really. I never thought about putting a bot into this. And then like, yeah, well, we'd really like you to have one. If you can't design it, we'll have somebody else design it. I said, well,
We'll put Jason on it. It'll be fine.
Yeah, and so okay, you know what? I'll take a stab at it, and it ended up I'm quite happy with it. I have some very dedicated testers that are just sending, and every time they send me a AAR after one of their play tests, and they get smoked by the bot, I'm like,
well, Sam, hold on a second. I might be wrong, but don't the dice itself give you the option of it being super solitaire friendly?
yeah, you can two-hand the game, no problem. But they wanted a bot in addition to that. When I was building the game, I played it two-handed all the time. I never had a problem. But if you want to have pure true solo play, it's there. The way I designed it, which I'm actually quite happy with, is it's a small deck of cards, and each of the cards is a little flow chart that just gives you like, okay, is this the game state? Then do this. Is this game state? Then do that. But the thing is that they're coming from these decks that are themed after dispositions. So there's a reckless bot and a cautious bot. And so the idea is you can just randomly take cards from those two decks together. And that way, every time you play, it'll be cautious in some circumstances and reckless in other circumstances. And it'll never be the point where it's like, oh, okay, I know what it's going to do here. Because that's my pet peeve. When I'm playing games with a bot or something, if I'm like, I know this game state, bot's going to do this, so I can respond. I'm going to prep because I know the bot will do that. You'll never have that with this bot. It's very idiosyncratic.
Now, this release is World War II as the setting, of course. Yeah. And, I mean, that certainly makes sense. Are there plans to either expand this either elsewhere into World War II or into other topics?
Yes.
At least if it does well.
That's right. Yes. Yes.
So the thing that's hard for this is kickoff for a new system.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I can really say is that I have a lot of support within GMT, which is wonderful. I'm tremendously grateful for that. But we need people to like it, right? So if the game is out there and people actually, maybe even if the game isn't it.
Ruh-roh, Raggy. Sam has locked up. And I don't think it's me, because Dan is not locked up, unfortunately.
I ain't locked up.
Dan is doing fine.
I don't know how.
I'm back.
There you go.
So I have the Kobe. It's almost entirely designed. I have a very, like a pure quality of life expansion that adds multiplayer, which I'm really excited about. Some added bot functionality and the random scenario generator, which the RSG is amazing. I'm very happy with it, but it's just too much stuff to fit in the core box. And so that stuff's pretty much ready to go. Yes, I was pinned. That stuff's pretty much ready to go if the desire's there. And then people immediately start asking me about Vietnam. So there's definitely there's interest to. I don't know if I would go back. Like, this is a very modern combat system. But outside, yeah, I could totally imagine taking it outside of World War II. So.
And I had a great question that I totally forgot about.
I swear to God.
Yeah, but you do this all the time. So
I'll answer Mander's question while you think.
Oh, that's all good.
So tanks, artillery, air support. Air support is not in the game yet. I can imagine adding that in the future, but there's not a current implementation for it.
Tanks,
armor, and artillery are both in the game. There's small, so there's indirect fire from mortars and stuff like that. But then there's also large-scale off-board artillery. Those are handled separately. They're very, how would I put this? Intentionally. So every every time in the game you roll doubles. If it was a success on the check, something great happens. And if you roll doubles on a failure, something bad happens. And so as a result of that, a lot of that indirect fire stuff can go really off the rails and end up with some friendly fire and stuff like that. Armor's I love armor, and so I've actually, that's one of my sticking points. Is I've never been particularly happy with any one system's take on armor. And so in Firefight Tactical, armor is, in a way, it's almost mobile terrain, because it's a moving terrain effect modifier that you just stack infantry onto to try to keep them, in a defensible spot. And then you got your HE fire, you got your anti-tank fire, and they can level buildings. And I mean, there's armor's fun. And so when they're in the game, you definitely feel it.
So how long did design was this game happening in your head, Sam?
From my head to till when I pitched it, or till now?
Inception to happening right now.
About 2 years.
That's it.
I was going to ask that. So in terms of like design pipeline, right? Did you like start out with the mechanical idea or with the theme where you said, I would really like to do a World War II tactical game. Here's how I would like it to. I'd like it to be.
Kind of both. I had a feeling I was going to want to do a World War II tactical, but then I was thinking, okay, as I mentioned, I wanted to marry it to a Euro mechanic. I wanted to pull it out of kind of its usual shtick. And so then I started thinking about, okay, well, what Euro mechanic could I possibly marry it to? And as soon as I thought of a dice draft, I was like, that's it. It's done. And it just, I mean, from there, it pretty much wrote itself. I think I had a playable prototype in 2 months.
Sounds like a pretty natural fit in terms of like managing command control from the standpoint of player agency.
Yeah.
And like a pretty good balance. I think I had the same issue as you did with Combat Commander because I felt a lack of player agency too much of the time.
Yeah.
And this seems to eliminate that while also introducing some uncertainty in that not all your stuff is going to do everything you wanted it to accomplish.
Yeah, it definitely, I mean, we were talking about narrative. It's one of the, I would say, the strongest aspects of Firefight Tactical is the narrative generation. Because you're having to roll with the punches, but then there's so many moments. So as an example, actually, I'm gonna touch on two things. Then I'll give you the example. So leaders in the game are your main source of dice mitigation. So if you have bad luck, and it's like, oh, I can't do anything that I want to do. That's what your leaders are for. Your leaders can convert dice into other actions for other guys. So you want to have them in a key position so they can make sure that the thing you absolutely need to make happens, right? But even then, things can kind of go off the rails. And so, yep, that's right. Thank you, Mike. The other thing is that if you roll, so morale checks and rally checks, if you succeed and roll doubles, so like a critical success or however you want to imagine it, you get something called a Valor. And when you have a Valor in the game, that's them going hero mode. ASL was the inspiration for this. And so how it's represented in Firefight Tactical is they just can do whatever they want. You just get one action. They can do whatever they want. You don't need to assign a die. They can even already have a die on them. And they just go all heroic and do whatever they want to do. That is a major engine for narrative moments in gameplay, because you'll have these things where it's like, okay, these guys are running through no man's land. This was already a Hail Mary play. This is certain death. They get to, they take a whole bunch of op fire, and somehow they roll snake eyes, because it's, again, ASL lover, rolling low is good. They somehow roll snake eyes, and now all of a sudden they hero mode, and they just go straight into the bunker and get them in melee. It's just stuff that just comes out of nowhere and makes these sessions so much more memorable. And so
it's very Captain America.
Yeah.
Thank you, John Stanley. I don't know if you've thought this far ahead in terms of expanding the game to other arenas.
Stalin
But
grab,
you've also played ASL, so you can answer this question if you like in the context of other games. Are tactics in, say, Europe and again we're limiting it to World War II, Europe and or North Africa different from tactics in the Pacific? I'd say yes, depending on scale.
Mhm.
But
Yes, I can only speak to the Eastern Front, but I'm very pleased with how it's going to model Eastern Front. North Africa, I'm not concerned. Pacific will be more of a lift, but
oh
I,
yeah, okay, yep.
yeah, at the tactical scale, right?
Yeah.
It feels pretty different depending on the Pacific's a big theater, and there were a number of different kinds of actions, and not every single, combat encounter went down like the Marines invading Saipan, right? So,
the other thing is that I would say maybe the single greatest strength mechanically of Firefight Tactical is there's a lot of ways to work with Fog of War.
mm,
And so I think that there are ways that I can kind of dial that up to 11 that I haven't yet, that I think will do a lot better in the Pacific Theater.
well, let me ask something along those lines then. What made you decide to go with sort of a I guess I'll call it, because I don't have a better term for it, a cardboard board. You know what I'm saying? Where you build the play arena out of cards,
Yes, sir.
as opposed to going with like static maps. Since you do have scenarios in this thing, right? It's not just like this sort of generic, combat with Vic Morrow type of situation, and everybody rolls dice and you start playing.
Yep. So I'm gonna kind of answer this in a roundabout way. In my mind, there's kind of two ways to approach historicity in game design. One is a very devoted simulation approach, where it's like I'm going to try to put in everything the way that it was, and then we're going to play through it and we're going to see what happens. An alternative way to do it, which believe me, I'm all about that also, but an alternative way to do it, I would say, is to go for more of a feel aspect. And so that's a little bit more what I was trying to go for here. And so what I mean by that is if I'm taking a scenario, so let's say I have a Carentan scenario, because this is, Normandy stuff.
Right.
So you're playing through the Carentan scenario. Carentan is you're coming through, it's the name of the scenario is Purple Heart Lane. You're coming through some fairly wet land around a road to get into urban terrain, and then it becomes urban house-to-house type combat, right? And so the thing is, the exact placement of all of these things, I think, is less important to tell the story than the feel of having to go through that and just a hail of gunfire to get to now this more claustrophobic fight and have it happen in the same stretch, right? And so the cards are, the way that they work is, the way I term it is, the battle grid is comprised of zones, which are in this grid, and each zone is represented by a card. The terrain card doesn't represent, this is the only thing that's here. What it represents is, this is what's tactically relevant in this zone at this moment. And so you can move laterally within a zone. You can scout ahead and find that there's multiple things in a zone and choose between them which card you play there. This is where my men go, right? But what's actually being represented there is, this is what's tactically relevant. This is how we're going to approach things. And so you're still kind of, the scenarios supply you with the terrain decks. So that's how you're like, okay, this is what this makeup's going to be. This is going to be more urban. Actually, this is going to have a lot more streets. Actually, this is now, plains. But, out in all this grassland, there's actually some streams and some stuff you got to watch out for. And so that kind of breakdown is scenario specific, and they'll still feel different that way. But now I have the benefit of this increased fog of war. You can play the same scenario over and over and over again, because it's not going to be the same puzzle every time you go into it. And you have that much more, how would I put it? It's stressful to enter into combat. because it's not like I have God level understanding. There is a stone over here. No one's even over there, but I know it's there if I decide to go there for some reason. Here, I don't know. I just come over the hill and it's like, oh, there's actually a stone wall. Let's post up here for a while and try to, get some more recon before we advance. You have these puzzles that work themselves out organically instead of me giving you this concrete model every time you play.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This may be a publisher question, but I'll ask it from that standpoint. Did you come to GMT with your own team, I guess, of art and development folks, or is that something that GMT helped out with? I would imagine the answer is the latter, but I can think of examples in the hobby of the former.
Yeah. Neither and both. I actually am kind of crazy about how I put together my prototypes. I don't bring in printer paper and text. That's just not. I did over a decade in the video games industry, so I have kind of some hang-ups around prototyping, and so I actually spent quite a bit of time working up the prototype for Firefight Tactical. And in the case of the artwork for the cards, it was just a matter of finding photos of various places in France, and then running them through some AI filters to turn them into impressionist paintings or whatever. But it's still the photo, and it's just placeholder stuff. I doubt that's what we'll go with. But it was not hard in that aspect. There were definitely harder assets to come upon. But again, this is all placeholder stuff for the time being.
Sam, previously you said something about fog of war, that you can strategize your fog of war kind of thing, right? So I thought just the dice itself would create fog of war, but you're saying you can actually play the fog of war.
Well, the cards are the fog of war, but there's your fog of war is represented in kind of three major ways. The dice are a major way. Another way is the cards being face down, and then there's concealment. Concealment's a very big part of Firefight Tactical because the counter that goes on top of the unit it's concealed has its own dice menu for the actions. So there's actually some actions that you can only take while the unit's concealed. Once they become unconcealed, they can't do those things anymore. And that also applies to them if they're decoy counters. And so you kind of have this, it's a lot more gamified than your usual decoy counters that you see a lot. Concealment counters that you see a lot. When I was talking about gaming Fog of War, what I was specifically referring to was the terrain cards, because you'll have things. I'll give you an example. So a fairly common leader action is Survey. And so Survey is related to Scout. But the way that it works is that your leader looks into a face-down terrain card. So it's not set. There's nothing there that's tactically relevant yet. And so they'll look at that card and they'll draw an extra card from the terrain deck. So this is for the scenario. And they'll choose between them which they'd rather have there. Now, it could be that they want to place a terrain card there that's excellent terrain, so because they have units that are close, and then they're going to move them in, and now they're in a good spot. But it could also be that they survey there and it's like, oh, this is like some horrible wire or something, that's been set up, and I'm going to leave that there for the enemy, for them to find. But you can also, and this is part of the survey action, it's my choice whether I turn that face up, saying I'm making this tactically relevant now, or if I leave it face down for them to find. And so there's some head games that can go around for that kind of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of ways in which Fog of War can be gamified.
Man, I'm stoked for this game. I swear, the first time I saw it, I was like, that looks interesting. And yeah.
Well, I spent a lot of time thinking about this over the last week because I spent most of the last week playing Great Campaigns of the American Civil War, where there's a considerable amount of randomness in what stuff you're actually going to be able to accomplish based on what you need to do, right? So to me, it's really interesting and attractive. I almost demand some level of uncertainty in command control, right? You're going to have to make decisions about what is the important objective that you're trying to get done immediately and what is going to have to wait because you don't have the wherewithal or tools or resources or men or dice or whatever it is to get it done right this second.
Yep. I'm going to let you guys in on a dirty little secret. Don't tell the Euro crowd that I'm trying to woo so they're less afraid of the war game.
Uh-oh.
It's kind of a chit pull system. Don't
You've already enraged the Euro people just by including dice in the game.
Yeah.
No,
Well, no,
man.
they're okay with your dice draft so long as it's in a worker
Yeah.
placement type system, which this kind of is.
Yeah, man. I guess I could kind of see that, right? Except it's dice placement, right?
Yep.
No. It's too bad I'm not on the dice tower doing the breakfast things in the morning because this is perfect.
Yeah, there's
Perfect.
a million. It's quite a few dice. And
It's perfect.
How many dice will be included with the game? I need to ask this.
too many.
Too many. I don't know.
I
Full-size
forget the
dice?
exact number. I think it's going to be about 60.
60?
I think
What?
it's-
That's a lot of dice. Holy cow!
Well, hold
Let
on.
me think about it. So it's 20 white dice, and then I think it's 12 each of red, yellow, and blue, and then 3 larger dice. So,
Okay, because on the GMT webpage they say 30 dice.
oh yeah, that's not right.
Right.
Somebody tell Gene.
It's more than that.
That's a lot of dice, I gotta say. Are they good? They're not going to be those tiny 2mm dice, I hope.
The dice you roll for actions are going to be the your full 16mm, and then the dice that you do for the dice draft are 12mm, because the whole point is that you're actually, like, after you pick them up, it doesn't matter what they are. As soon as you assign it to a unit, it's a exhaustion counter. But the it's really just so you can see them there, put them, and then you can fit it on the counter. The counters are 1.5 inches. They don't take up too much space.
Right. I was thinking of champions, to be completely honest about it. So
Sam,
I don't know.
Is there how much downtime is in this game?
Very, very little, almost none. Because the thing is that it's an impulse-based system. So you're only activating one unit at a time, unless you do a coordinate action with the leader, but then you're activating one stack to do the same order. So you're always just doing one order at a time. And then when it's not your turn, you're very frequently looking for op fire. And so there's very little. And then when it's not your turn, I've seen so many games of this where somebody's like, "Oh, I got nothing left I can do," because all their units are exhausted, but the other side's the attacker, so they have superiority in numbers, and so like, "Oh yeah, I got nothing going on," and then they hit a valor or something, and it's like, "Oh well, now all of a sudden I'm in the catbird seat. There's all kinds of how am I going to take this now?" So yeah, there's very, very little downtime.
It's funny, all the detail that you're talking about, op fire. Obviously the fog of war. I didn't think it was, and I'm sure it goes more into detail than that, but to me it didn't look that strategic or that detailed, you understand, by just looking at that. But now the way you say it, man.
Well, the thing is, a big part of how I've been showing the game is I'm showing Holden, I'll come back to initiative. I'm actually really happy with how initiative worked. But the way I've been showing the game around is I'm showing the early scenarios, like the first 1 or 3 scenarios. And so, I'm not adding in armor and artillery and all this craziness until later. Like you ramp up into that. And so I really wanted that first, especially 2 scenarios, to be, I'm not going to scare anybody off with this. Like you just the amount
So
of
that's
action.
what we have here on the GMT page, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're not looking at stuff that's too outlandish. But once you get into like your Operation Cobra stuff, that's when it starts being like, okay, now I'm having some fun here. I got much more in the way of combined arms. I got a mess of units on the board. And yeah, it becomes quite more involved. To go back to the initiative question, the way initiative works is, so I mentioned you're drafting from this common pool of dice, but you also have what we call a private reserve. So you and your opponent will have your own set of dice that's just for you, but it's comparatively limited in number. And so the thing is, when you pull from that, you also get to burn a die of your choice from the common pool. No matter what, every impulse turn, dice are coming out of the common pool because that's your game timer. Because that pool's empty, that's the end of the game turn, and they all come back. But when you pull from your private reserve, you get to burn a die from there. But if you're the non-initiative player, you also get to attempt to seize initiative. And so you end up in this kind of catch-22 situation as the game's going on, where I'm like, if you're the non-initiative player, you want to use that, you want to try to seize initiative, but when you seize initiative, and this is a big deal, you actually get 2 draws in a row. So it's not just, great, I'm going to go first next turn. It's also instantaneously, I can turn the tide. I get 2 pulls in a row. That can be a big deal. And so you're trying to figure out when you want to use that. On the flip side, the player with initiative, they have their own private reserve, but when they draft from it, they don't get any benefit besides to just use the dice. But frequently they need to use them. But if they use them, now they're not going to have them ready if they lose initiative to try to pull it back. And so they might have to wait a whole game turn for them to refresh, for them to try to take it back. And so that kind of dilemma there is a big part of the initiative play.
What's the expected playtime per scenario?
It depends on the scenario. For the first several, it's Jason of GMT fame. He got it down with his wife to like 30 minutes for the first scenario. For the later scenarios, I'd say the biggest ones are still under 2 hours when you know what you're doing. Those are like the quite large scenarios. As I teased, I have hopes and dreams for multiplayer. That'll probably throw things off the rails a little bit, but we're not there yet. So for just 2-player stuff, 2 hours tops for this.
And I feel like this might end up being a popular convention game. Actually, that's what it sounds like to me.
I'm very into it. I mean, it's again, I'm very happy with the solo play. I'm not discounting the solo play, but from the get-go, I was designing this imagining like you playing with an opponent, and you both know each other, you both know how to play, and now it's like, you kind of have your own meta of, I'm not going to let him have the 3s because I know what he tends to do with 3s, in this situation when he's got a bunch of support squads, that kind of thing. And so taking it to conventions, I think, would be awesome.
Mm-hmm. And newsflash, some games do in fact have downtime.
Yeah.
In some games, you may be able to play either 4 of your short scenarios or 1 of your long scenarios during your downtime.
Yes.
And then in your next downtime, you can play another one.
Yes, you can definitely play a full game of Firefight Tactical in between Here I Stand turns.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that wasn't I was thinking OCS personally, but they got through about it, and maybe this is a 10-player game that I was observing casually last week. They played about a turn a day at that, so there was plenty of downtime.
Perfidious Albion. I don't know if you were the next question, but you jumped out at me.
Yeah, well, this only has you Germans and Americans in it, right? This initial set.
But I got plans. I know how to answer this question.
He's got plans.
The way they differ is so in stats, as far as the actual core stats on a counter, their morale, their firepower, their range, all that kind of stuff. But in a much bigger way, what differentiates them is their dice menu.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the dice, if you have like a cell and it says you can use any 3. It's going to be much easier to do that than if it says you can use a 3, but it has to be red, or it can be either yellow or blue. So that kind of restriction, I can have it where it's like, they still do the same things, but it's much harder to get them to do it. I have to work harder to make them do such and such thing than I would have to with another nationality. And so that brings in a lot of personality there. That being said, I started with Americans and Germans because I 100% intended to make them the vanilla ice cream. So as far as future plans, they are much more middle of the road than you're going to see with your Soviets or your Italians or your Japanese. They are just to give you a preview, I'll just say this. So Soviets, they get a lot more in number and their morale is trash. And so their whole thing is that, you got a bunch of them and they're much easier to kind of get to where you need them to be. But then as soon as they are actually in contact with the enemy, they fall to pieces. But they also have much, 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 much cheaper and more common leaders than everybody else does in the form of commissars and stuff like that. And so you have to do a much more broad effort to keep them in line than your Germans or your Americans. But yeah, they'll each have their own personality. There's your terrain cards.
Yep, I would assume so. GMT says there'll be 12 12 scenarios in the set, but they also say there's only 30 dice. So is that actually accurate?
Yeah, I have to go back. I'm actually now. You keep saying 30 dice. It's making me worried that actually got cut, and I'm forgetting and like saying an old number. I'm wondering if I should look that up now. But the 12 scenarios, the big thing I want to mention with that is that, as I've kind of alluded to, these are tremendously replayable. So it's the kind of thing like I was shooting for 12 because that's kind of a magic number in my mind.
Well, the Babylonians agree.
Yeah, we're not okay. So I was off, but we're over 30. We're at like 40.
Okay, it's still a lot of dice.
Anyway, so the 60 dice. You're not rolling 60 dice. I forget where I said this, but it's like, this is not Warhammer. You are not rolling 60 dice for a fire check. You're only ever rolling 2 dice for a check. But the other thing that I really want to highlight, as I mentioned...
You've got a dice-slinging dice fest on the shelf right there behind you, Sam.
Which one?
The Napoleonic Wars.
Oh, well, yeah, and I love that.
That is a dice-slinging dice fest. I'm pretty sure I've rolled 20-plus dice on a single combat in that thing.
Dice-slinging dice fest. You roll dice and it could end the game on the first turn. I love it. But anyway, the thing I want to highlight is that I mentioned the random scenario generator. I was very happy with that system, but it's too, roll 30 dice for initiative.
Roll 30 dice every time.
But it was too big to fit in the core box. But what I'm still putting in the box is the logic. And so this game is ludicrously easy to put together custom scenarios for. And I don't mean you work on it and you think about it and you're like, oh, maybe this will be a really cool one and maybe I'll show it to the guys next week. I mean, no, you go into the room, you can sit at the table, and maybe you extend your playtime 5 minutes, and you've thrown together a custom scenario that you can just play through. So there's a lot of replayability in there beyond just the 12 scenario.
So do the scenarios represent specific actions, historical actions, or do they represent more categories of historical actions that may play out very differently depending on how things develop during that particular game?
So they represent specific historical actions. But I kind of was working on trying to do multiple things at once there. I scared him off. He's like, "Oh wow, he's doing that with the cards." How's that?
I mean, I look at his sinuses are coming out of his eyeballs. You know what I'm saying?
I know. I just got to mention it. He asks a question, he runs away.
No, I'm listening.
So so they're historical. Nice. Which edition is that? Which board do you got?
This is the 2nd edition. Here is the dice that I have in the box.
You gotta be kidding me.
You got your special dice there for each of your nationalities.
That's right.
Yeah, I love it. The thing is, what I was trying to do with the scenario design is I want to do historical action at like specific ones. So you're going through Carentan, and then you end up at Cherbourg, and then St. Lo, and then the last scenarios are market garden scenarios. But the other thing I wanted to do was, in addition to kind of slowly adding in more mechanics to try to say, okay, as soon as we get to Bloody Gulch, here's your armor. Let's talk about armor, and kind of add that stuff. The other thing I was really trying to do, to go back to the custom scenario idea, was I really want to kind of highlight the flexibility of the system. And so not so much with the first couple, those are really just keeping things light, but shortly thereafter, every scenario is kind of adding in mechanical elements that are just kind of a unique flavor to that scenario to try to say, hey, you could do things this way. So like, for example, I gave the Carentan example. A lot of the scenarios are using a single deck for the terrain deck that kind of randomly generates your battle map, right? But that doesn't make sense for Carentan. So Carentan has 2 decks. One is for the approach and one is for the city. And so you kind of can have it where now your map is divided into sections. I ended up doing the same thing for Best at Eindhoven, where it's like, okay, now you kind of have it where it's still randomly generated. I don't think I would go more than 2 decks, but you can kind of have these halves of the board that are the terrain is totally different but still random. And so I wanted to highlight that. But then as another one, so for my Folly's Pocket scenario, I wanted to show. So normally you're taking dice. I didn't cover this, but at the end of each game turn, you're taking a die out of the game timer and adding it to the common pool. So the number of impulses, effectively, you get every game turn increase every game turn. But I was like, wouldn't that be interesting to do the opposite for a scenario? For the Folly's Pocket scenario, you start with all the dice, and then the dice are coming off every game turn, so you're having fewer and fewer impulses. And so I, just little kind of things like that to kind of shake things up. So it's a showcase of the system and all these historical actions that happen from D-Day through Market Garden.
I was going to ask you something concerning this question exactly.
You do Dirty Dozen in it? That's what springs to mind immediately.
Garden, stuff like that, man.
They can be. There's a scenario that's specifically to show off paratroopers at night. And so it's a double blind scenario for kind of showing that off. There isn't a specific Dirty Dozen level heroism stuff. I'm keeping it fairly faithful. But again, it shows the capacity of the system to handle just that kind of thing.
And Sam, the system, what do you like? I mean, can it be exported to other type of games, Euro games? What am I trying to say, Artie? That system itself, where can we port it to? What type of other games can we export?
We kind of asked this before, but it's an intriguing enough idea that I'd be curious to see how you felt about. Maybe not so much changing the topic, although you could do that too, but changing the scale and turning it into like a regimental level game with similar dice draft mechanic. I think that might be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'm certainly open to it. So the thing there, trying to think of what I can say about like little side projects and stabs I've taken. I've looked at it. For there, it gets much more into the realm of, in my mind, worker placement, where it's kind of like, because the actions are simplified at that level, the granularity is obviously much, much higher for, tactical squad stuff. But yes, I've thought about it.
I mean, it's all right to be coy, too. If you haven't settled on what an answer is going to be, I'll take that.
I have 1 million projects I can talk about, and then 2 million I can't. So that's
or GMT will send hit people after you.
Oh, GMT has pretty much let me over talk as much as I like, which is great because I can't. Really
have noticed.
Yeah.
Not that you're blabbing a lot. It's just that you've done a lot of interviews over the last 30 days or so. In fact, reading through GMT's recent newsletter was like, here's our interviews for the month. Sam London.
I have to say something in my defense. I've done one interview in the last month. All the rest of those were quite a while ago, and they somehow all ended up being posted at the same time.
I see.
I thought you were on a world tour or something, man.
No,
you should have a T-shirt with the dates on the back and everything.
And that was to be clear. That was, I think the most recent of those was 3 months ago. That ended up getting, it just took that long for them to have a time to post them.
Oh, so we are talking about the Players Aid that does all their stuff months in advance.
They are among the ones I am talking about.
Because they're that organized. We are less organized here.
And I'm here for it. This one I scheduled to be here for this time. So yeah,
and we appreciate it because I
didn't know until they were posted. I'm like, oh wow, I would have spaced these out a little bit more if I had control.
Oh, I totally feel that. Totally feel that. Yeah.
Man, this system is just. Did you have? What's that game there that? It's World War I tanks. It's steampunkish. It comes in a small little box.
Scythe.
No, that's not a small box.
No.
Yeah, not last I checked. Dan, that box is bigger than you.
No, I've got it. I've got it in the car, for God's sakes.
Steampunk
and
World
it's
War One, not running in a bell.
And it's not Scythe?
Eh?
It's not Scythe?
No, it's a
But
World
do you,
War
do you
One.
pronounce it Scythe?
Oh, for God's sakes, man!
Is that
You
how
know what
the
I'm
French
saying?
Canadians say it?
For God's sake!
I don't know what else you might be talking about. There was a World War II steampunk, like a steampunk World War II miniatures game that I remember seeing at Origins one year, and can't recollect the name of it at the moment. But they had a very large and impressive booth at the time.
Yeah.
Dan is conducting live research.
You could be talking about Russ. You could be talking about Tannhäuser. I mean,
I think Rust. I think that was the thing I'm thinking of.
I'm talking about Pocket Landship.
Oh, Pocket Landship. Yeah, okay. What about it?
And
That's what I was going to ask. What about it?
I completely forgot why I brought Pocket Landship. But I figured
10 minutes
I
later,
brought
Pocket
it and inspiration from that because it's a dice fest. This
The master of focus, folks.
Oh, I've never actually played or read Pocket Landship.
it's a lot of fun.
I'm pretty sure I've never heard of Pocket Landship, actually.
It's a lot of fun. Okay.
The other thing, this is not a part of this, but I have as a designer, I do a thing when I'm working on a game that if I read or see anything that's like, oh, this looks like it's kind of might have potential overlap, I just black box it. I won't look at it until I'm done.
That's reasonable.
Yeah.
Do you use any kind of like mind mapping tools or anything like that? What are the tools you use to facilitate game design? Let me ask the question that way.
Have you been talking to somebody? Are you trying to prompt? Do you know the answer to that question?
No, I'm genuinely curious because I use Excel for all this stuff personally.
So I do use Excel, but so by trade I'm a data scientist, and so I do a lot.
Oh, okay. I had no idea. I swear I had no idea.
Yeah, I do a lot of AI development, and so a lot of games that I build, I'll create various levels of artificial intelligence to play it for me. To kind of map out the decision space and look for the most obvious failure points. And so there's a lot of way that I can get jump starts on games that way. What I'll do is they'll kind of they'll rule out. I can't not talk about this because I'm so excited about it. I can't say what game this is for yet. But there's a game that for the first time I actually had the AI partially design the game for me. So I gave it the parameters, and then it told me this is the scope of the system, and this is how you need to fill out the decision space. And then I took what it gave me, and I built the system to that spec. Which was really cool, and I'm going to be doing that as much as I can in the future because it probably saved me like 2 months of development.
That's an interesting idea, and B, I think a legit use of artificial intelligence that doesn't like take away creator agency, right?
Well, no, I gave it the parameters.
Right.
Here's the game I'm trying to make. Help me take this incredibly complicated space and get it down to something that actually can be turned into a discrete system where people are just working with however many cards and dice. Mm-hmm. And it gave me the solution, and then I just had to take that solution and turn it into a game.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Wow.
Yeah, it was really cool. So,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, were you surprised at the AI?
Huh?
Were you surprised at the AI that came out with that?
No, because I do it in my day job, and so
I was just going to say, it did what he told it to do, so why would that be surprising?
Yeah,
Okay,
for once I used it for good instead of evil, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh wow, it can do good too. That's great.
Now, okay, Sam, your day job, what is it, man? What do you do?
He just told you.
I'm a data scientist.
He's a data scientist.
Yeah,
You didn't tell me he was a data scientist. He told me
He just said data scientist.
I'm a data scientist.
He literally just said that. You know, in my day job, I'm a data scientist.
Man.
See, Mike is saying, because Mike's been playing the game for me, he says the unnamed game is super fun because it works. But I just jumped from tech company to tech company, and I build AI solutions around big data. That's
So you're one of those smart guys, eh?
No. I figured out a place that I could do stuff and people would appreciate it and think that it sounds really smart, but it's really just very.
So what made you get into gaming, man?
Oh, I've been in gaming my whole life. It was when I was a kid. All I wanted to do was be a video game designer, and then I fell out of love with video games because I worked in the video game industry.
That'll do it.
Yep. And then I was okay. Well,
well, this sucks.
I got transitioned into being a board gamer, and then it took me a little bit to start going, maybe I should try actually designing board games. And then as soon as I did it, like, this is amazing because I can just iterate so fast. And then I have as far as a game that I have a game convention that I host at my house twice a year. Small little thing. It's like 20 to 30 people. But I have that coming this weekend as the next one of those. And so
if I had 30 people over here, I'd have to store them out in the ditch.
Yeah. So I'm all about the games over here. I'm a games first guy.
I love this comment from William Aarons because it leads me to start calling the guys from the Players Aid, and we love them very much, the cruel nuns of wargaming. So, as somebody that went to Catholic school, that's meaningful.
I tend to enjoy chaos. I like a sports shouting equivalent of podcasts for the hobby.
That reminds. Somebody should design a war game that feels like Pit.
Like
Feels
what?
like Pit.
Pit. Have you ever played Pit?
You're talking
with the bell?
Yeah.
That Pit? Yeah. You know what game I'm talking about, Dan?
No, not at all. I thought you were talking about armpits.
No, that's a different Pit.
Molotov, I love that comment. I need to make a shirt out of that.
Catholic school is a war game?
Yeah. My kid's in Catholic school, so I feel
Sounds like
that.
a Zappa thing.
The stacking limit. How did I get into wargaming? It was actually really cool for me. It was a cool story. So I was already really into gaming. I've been very wargame curious, but I was very intimidated by all the rule books and all this stuff. And so I went to a convention called KublaCon that's in Burlingame, California.
I've heard of it.
And I went around, and it was so cliquey. It was just everybody already knew everybody there.
I thought you were going to say you went to ASL Oktoberfest.
No. And so, ASL came much later than this. ASL is not the answer to this question. And so I was wandering around the convention. I didn't really feel at home anywhere. And then I found the Wargamers, which at the time they were stowing all the grown-yards in like sub-basement storage closet F. And it was just that's where they had squirreled them away. And I walked in there, and I was immediately welcomed. And there was this gentleman who I really wish I could remember his name, but he was just sitting there, and he just came there to teach people no retreat. And so I was okay. I'll sit down for this, and he taught me no retreat, and it was all over. I absolutely had a blast, and at that point, I just started buying war games like crazy, and the rest is history.
Was his name Carl?
I have no memory. I really wish.
Okay.
I did.
Was he a big brutish? Was he a big brutish type of guy?
No,
German looking.
He was a skinny, tall guy. But ever since then, it's been I play everything. I play tacticals, I play strategic level, and then I still am playing all my more like internal. I play all my Euro still, all my Ameritrash, and I play all the things.
I guess let's cover this, because if this was talked about pre-show, I missed it because I was, for a change, the last person in the session. Are you actually descended from writer Jack London?
No relation whatsoever.
Okay. But presumably you're descended from someone who was from London at some point.
Well, if you really want to know, when my family came over from Lithuania, they needed a new last name, and so they went with London because my great-great-grandfather was a merchant on the seas, and his primary stopping point was London, so they called him the Londoner, so that's how we ended up with this
That
thing.
makes perfect sense. That reminds me of
Perfect sense.
yeah. I've told the story before. The let's say somewhat embellished story of the descent of the ancestor that showed up and they said, "Ah, I have come to America. Please send me to where all the Dutch people are."
Mhm.
So they sent him to live with the Pennsylvania Dutch.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, these people are not Dutch." And he had to Germanize his Dutch name to fit in with the Pennsylvania Dutch.
Gotcha. Interesting.
So, similar story. It's slightly hypothetical, but I feel like there is some basis for it.
Yeah.
And considering it's 300 years ago, it's, I could basically make up whatever I'd like at this point.
Mine is quite literal. That's exactly what happened.
All right. Well, you've got this is slightly more recent than the Jan Peter Mengele that got off the boat from Rotterdam in 1791.
Yeah.
So,
no, this is 100 years after that.
yeah. So, all right, folks, we are out of time, and I'd like to thank Sam for coming out tonight. I'm glad I didn't call you Jack at any point. That's good, considering I'm not exactly laser focused this evening, thanks to whatever allergy thing I got going on. So I want to thank Sam for coming out. I have thrown a link into the chat for the product page on GMT's website. If anybody wants to check it out, there's a lot of good info there. And if anybody needs more dice, this is the game to buy
Super cheap way to get dice
for the year. Yeah, no kidding. 60 dice.
Sam,
60 to 80 dice. You heard it here first, folks. 120 dice. Every time I report this news, the number of dice that's coming in the game is going to go
The number
up.
of dice in the box is going to be equal to the number of the pre-orders on the
by the way,
P500.
Sam.
So rack them up.
That is a brilliant marketing idea.
Sam, how thick is the box? How thick is the box?
It's going to be a standard size GMT box.
Okay.
I would demand a 5-inch box. I'm just saying.
Yeah, it's
I
a
demand a 5-inch box.
It's a decent sized box because I kept asking for more counter sheets. And
Are you going to get as a separate box? Will that be made available just to store the 497 dice?
Seriously?
That'll probably end up, if I have my druthers, that'll be the function of the second box.
There you go.
That expansion I alluded to, because that'll add the multiplayer, and then you're going to need all that extra.
Dice storage, yes.
Before we split, I have a joke. You want to hear the joke?
Oh my God, is this a tasteless joke?
Yes.
Oh boy. All right, my finger's on the button.
You guys want to see Elvis?
No?
Okay.
You want to see Elvis? Grab a flashlight and a shovel. Let's go.
I don't just because a coffin box. Are you making referencing? I don't understand the joke.
When you explain a joke, it's the worst thing to do.
Okay, so you're just gonna let it make no sense.
No, it's just not funny, Dan. I'm pretty sure I got it.
On Sissy Cat, I will definitely clip the dice. Actually, I hope that. I'll really try to have rounded corners on those dice, but
Absolutely. GMT tends to ship games with Chessex D6s, and they're pretty rounded, so we'll be fine.
I will say this: I fought tooth and nail for this, but all the counters are already pre-rounded.
There you go. There you go. What's weird is that GMT, I think, might be the only people doing this, where they'll ship a game where some of the counters are pre-rounded and some of them aren't. And I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not.
Ones they don't. For me, I accepted like a 30% counter reduction to have them all rounded.
That's fine. I'm fine. I'm fine with that.
They do that for you so you can have your counter clipping episode.
I am happy to not clip the counters if they're already rounded. I'm not some kind of religious zealot about it. I just have to clip it because to do otherwise is heresy. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Gary,
I agree with
whatever you're on there for because of your headache or whatever, I want some.
It's not that good. It's Flonase is what it is. So it doesn't seem to be actually helping that much. All right, folks, we're out of time. We got other stuff to get to. I want to thank Sam for coming out this evening and all of you for showing up and putting up with our nonsense yet again. We will be back next week with our very special guest who will be somebody. Everybody have a great week, and we'll see you again next time.
Thanks a lot.
Big move. Big big. The moose is loose. Big moose. Big big. The moose is loose. Big moose. Big big. The moose is loose. Big.